Hey everybody, thank you for being at the next session of the Climate Track at the Yale Innovation Summit. My name is Stuart DeCue. I'm the Executive Director of the Yale Center for Business and the Environment and had the pleasure of organizing this track with colleagues and friends from around the university. One of the things that I think distinguishes the summit is the network of relationships that makes it happen and the people who are deeply committed to the kind of success of companies in the state, to the people who are behind those, and to the kind of institutional network of relationships that are here. And one of the people that's been instrumental kind of coming out of the university but being rooted and growing up in the region, really figuring out kind of how do you help create a better innovation ecosystem in the state of Connecticut is Constantine. So when you see him later, you can just call him KD, because everybody calls him KD. So when you go up, just say, hey KD, how are you doing? But he runs the Climate Tech Fund in the state of Connecticut. So $100 million, really looking at how do we deploy that in the right places, through economic development, with the right companies, with the right people to help the state grow in and around universities and hubs of innovation. And Constantine's an incredible friend, partner, and exemplifies the fact that I think, which is a strategic advantage of the state of Connecticut, it's a one-call state. You can literally just figure out a way to find and call somebody, whether it's the father of green chemistry, Paul Anastas. You could just find Paul's phone number. I don't know if it's on the internet, and call him later. Or, you can call KD up and say, like, I want to test an idea out and see if this place is a fit. And he picks up the phone and talks to you and helps make the introductions and make things happen. So we're thrilled that he's moderating this panel. Thank you for being here and for all you do for the community and the state. The show is yours.
Thank you. It's great to see everybody, and thank you, Stu, for that introduction, and to Yale for this wonderful summit, and to all the panelists who came here today. It's great to see everybody. So we are going to be having a fun, kind of open conversation about molecules to markets, chemistry's role in climate tech. Does everybody hear me? Okay. Okay. So we're gonna be diving into why green chemistry is playing such a pivotal, sort of critical role in helping to transition our markets and our consumer behavior to, really making a more sustainable world. And in a time that's just sort of upside down, I kind of feel like we're all in the twilight zone for a lot of different reasons. And it's affecting how we think about regulation, policy, but in maybe an interesting way, it's also sort of inspiring us to think about our own consumer behavior and how to really help drive markets and eventually capital markets in investing in new innovation and startups to help drive all that. So I always really like to throw out some interesting sort of numbers. I have no idea if they're correct, but I think it will benchmark some of our conversations around the markets that these folks are building companies in. So give me a minute. I'm going to throw a few of these out, and then we're going to kind of get right into it. So the global green chemistry market was marked at about $20 billion this past year. That's growing at around a rate of 12%. Targeted to hit about $35 billion in 2030. That obviously does not include sustainable fuels or bio-based chemicals like bioethylene or bio-based surfactants or solvents. Those are anticipated to hit $100 billion by 2030. Also growing at a nice rate of 10%. Some toxic, or rather green solvents on another area are growing at 25% annually, mostly due to stricter VOC limits. And then bioplastics, which I find to be pretty interesting, are growing at about 15 to 20%. And there's 3 million tons in capacity today. So we're seeing a lot of adoption. Markets are still small. Relatively speaking, but growing at a nice clip. And a lot of this was driven by regulation, at least in the US, and obviously we're seeing sort of a turn in that. But I believe there still will be some green things happening. But most of it was actually being driven by corporate sustainability initiatives. And these are targets driven by over 70% of Fortune 500 companies, setting targets, setting goals, and green chemistry solutions are a huge part of their strategy. And so the companies that we have up here today are literally playing right into the innovation needs of those strategics. So this panel today, which I'm honored to moderate, is going to explore how advancements in chemistry are shaping the future of climate technology. And we're going to delve into the critical role that chemistry plays, and we'll highlight the journey from scientific innovation to commercial success, and how these startups in particular are helping to change that landscape. We have on the panel some exceptional folks here today, so thank you all for coming again. And some of whom are bringing products to market and some actually who have products in market. And those are represented by or ranging from a low-carbon concrete company called Carbon Built, and the CEO of Carbon Built is Michelle Carvin, to precision nanofertilizers, which is represented by the co-founder of Prospect Growth and Andreas Backhaus, to clean, high-performance ingredients for consumer products, represented by Oyana Elizalde, I got that right, who's the CEO of P2 Sciences, and Staff Sheehan, who I don't know why he's here, he just kind of showed up, but he's in stealth mode, and we're going to actually have some cool conversation with him around nuclear fuel. So run of show, we'll be kicking off with just some self-introductions, talk a little bit about your companies or your stealth thing if you feel, or the market that it's in. And then we'll be getting to, and I want to spend quite a bit of time and reserve quite a bit of time for all you guys in the audience to have questions and be part of the conversation. And then we'll do a quick call to action with a pitch from the Global Green Chemistry Initiative and a call for mentors specifically. And that'll be from Lars and Hanmo here at Yale. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Michelle, if you don't mind introducing yourself and your company.
Absolutely. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm Michelle Carvin. I'm the CEO of Carbon Built. At Carbon Built, we are transforming the concrete industry, one of the most carbon-intensive industries in the world. And we enable concrete producers to reduce the carbon emissions from their concrete plants by up to 50% or more. And we do this by replacing cement, the most expensive and carbon-intensive ingredient within concrete, with a proprietary blend of ultra-low carbon industrial byproduct materials that we have engineered to be a cement replacement, as well as with the phase 2 carbonation curing process that permanently mineralizes carbon dioxide into the concrete. And what we're acutely focused on at Carbon Built is a commercially viable solution today that is lower cost and lower carbon. And we have made over 30,000 tons of ultra-low carbon concrete that has been sold into normal construction markets at price parity and has been used to build buildings across the southeast of the United States. And we're growing aggressively. We bought our first concrete plant in Connecticut in February. Previously, we were partnering with other concrete producers, and we have started to vertically integrate to own and operate our own concrete plants and push even greater levels of decarbonization within our own footprint.
Hey, I'm Staff Sheehan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company that's currently in stealth mode. And despite what you might hear or read in the press, climate change is still happening. And one of the sources of electricity that we have, a low carbon electrical source that could decarbonize chemical production with electrification across the board, is nuclear power. Very timely that I'm saying this. Last Friday, there were 4 executive orders that were signed, really unleashing nuclear power across the country in a lot of different ways. That's what my company does. We're the nuclear industry. We specifically focus on the fuel side of nuclear power, so uranium and uranium chemistry. Where our goal is to deploy nuclear to decarbonize both chemicals and data centers and a handful of other electrical applications that are currently causing around 30% of the greenhouse gas emission problem that we have in the world.
Okay, that's pretty impressive. Oyana Elizalde, I'm CEO at P2 Science. So what we are trying to do at P2 is build a different type of chemical company. The chemical sector, as you all are aware, has many challenges, from the raw materials that are mainly focused on fossil fuels to very outdated processes and manufacturing practices. So we are changing that paradigm in a very unique way. What we want to do is bring safer and cleaner ingredients that will transform many consumer goods. we spin off from the Center of Green Chemistry and Green Engineering here at Yale, with Paul here being one of the co-founders together with Pat. Very humbled to be here over the last couple of years to really build up the commercial engine. A couple of things maybe for you to take away of how we work at P2 and how we tackle these challenges is three things that are unique. One is that we build everything from abundant and natural raw materials like crop oils and byproducts from the pulp and paper industry. We don't try to mimic architectures that you find through fossil fuels. What we do is take these unique and beautiful ingredients and combine them in new ways, which means we develop first to-the-world natural compositions that never existed before. And that's very important to understand because that is giving us a different edge on performance. So we don't just bring natural and sustainable materials, but we elevate the performance of these ingredients. And the third thing, which I work in the chemical sector for many years, 16 years at BASF, is the very unique way to scale. And I know we'll talk more about that. But what we do is bring an approach to hyperscale. Everything we do is modular in tubes. And so every chemistry developed scales very quickly. Within weeks, we can double capacity at very, very low capital, which is, I think, unheard of in the chemical space. So very happy that we are already in market in beauty, but quite a few other industries that we're going to be looking into growing in the upcoming years.
Yeah, hello, I'm Andreas Backhaus, CTO and co-founder of Prospect Growth. Probably the most junior person here on the panel. So 2023 was when we founded the company and spun it out of Professor Judy Zimmerman's lab and the Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering at Yale. So what we're making is nanoparticle-based fertilizers. So if you're a farmer and you're really lucky, maybe 50% of the fertilizer, so all the nutrients that you apply, end up in your crop. Everything else gets tied up to the soil and eventually lost to the watersheds. And so what we are developing is these really tiny particles. If you would compare that to a kernel of corn, a nanoparticle to a kernel of corn is if you lined up kernel of corns one by one from here to New York. That's the difference in the size scale. So these are really small particles, and they get really easily into the plant by applying them as a spray or as an application in the soil. And the nutrients then get released over time in the plant. And with that, you can get a much higher transfer efficiency of the nutrients into the crop. To Johanna's point, there's actually been a lot of research on this over the past 15 years. And where we are coming in is with the process of making this much cheaper. So you can produce amounts where you can test it at the field scale in practical settings.
Cool. Thank you. So maybe with my first question, we can talk about how to accelerate adoption and sort of going from lab to market. And you've all had experience in different ways bringing something from a lab to a market. And there's gaps in not only finding financing to support that, but also commercial partnership and the like. And sometimes it's also even more difficult to bring a green alternative to market because of sort of a lack of supply chain or support for those products or those components, those precursors, whatever they may be. So I'd love for you guys to kind of tell us a little bit about how you think about bridging that gap. How do you think about convincing commercial partners as well as investors, if you don't mind? Is it the performance? Is it the sustainability metrics? Is it proving consumer demand or having sort of that support from the market? So why don't we start with Andreas, because you're sort of closest to the lab still, right? Yeah.
Yes, of course. So our aspect there is to develop products that help in the workflow of a normal farming operation. So there are certain points in time where you would like to get nutrients into the crop, but you can't with traditional fertilizers, and where you can do that with nanoparticle-based fertilizers. And that is our entry point to the fertilizer market. To the point of feedstocks and scaling operations, That is a very interesting point. Just as an example, for phosphorus, there are 13 phosphorus fertilizer plants in the US. So it's very consolidated. Most of that infrastructure is maybe on average 50 years old. So how do you integrate there? And all ore processes are based on already existing fertilizer feedstocks. So it's a reformulation process of existing feedstocks.
Thanks. Oyana, you mind going next?
Sure. So let me maybe talk about going from the lab into a scale up. And I think that was a very core question for the P2 team from the very beginning, right? Because if you think about replacing petrol-based polymers, PFAS, silicones, we didn't want to take the approach of kind of rebuilding the same architectures just using plant-based building blocks, right? Yep. So if you really take, again, what we want to do with the green chemistry approach and really take the 12 principles and really bring them to life and have the full impact, from the very beginning, it was clear that we had to build it almost grounds up in a different way. So it took longer, but this meant really going into selecting the right chemistries from the beginning, the raw materials. They need to be abundant but have the right functionality. Then not trying to leverage existing assets on the ground and almost try to push your chemistry to work in existing processes and existing synthetic tools, almost reimagining, if you were to build it from scratch and understand how a terpene wants to react, okay, let's understand how the natural pathways for that chemistry to happen. And what we did was harness that into new reactor designs. So a lot of the early work in the lab was to make the chemistry to happen in these tubular reactors, nail the chemistry in one reactor, harness it to happen in a ultra efficient, zero waste, it transforms within minutes, and you have a very clean, very low impact, very beautiful product. And then once you have it in one tube, the scale-up approach is really to build it in modules, so you add more tubes in parallel. So the scale factor was 1-to-1, which, it's a very different way to really go from lab to manufacturing when you think about how typically the chemical sector will do it. So it took longer, that upfront work, but what this enables us to do now is to hyperscale in a speed unseen before. And I think that's been key for us to now start to see that commercial momentum early on.
So maybe I'll just do a follow-up for both of you guys. So, and then I'll go to Michelle because I'm going to skip over staff because I got another question for you. So when you think about what it took to kind of convince your end customer to actually say, I'm going to adopt this, I'm going to buy a lot, and I'm going to test it. What did they need to see on your sort of capacity side, right? I mean, you got to a little bit, but ultimately, were there other sort of things at play there?
Yeah, definitely. So it started by selecting the right industry for us, which, again, the chemistry can go in many areas, but we decided to start in beauty. The consumer demand is there. So in that aspect, consumers are needing or asking already for these solutions. They are educated. So that was a great way to start. But then the challenge there in terms of the convincing is that it's also a very cluttered space. There is a lot of greenwashing. Everybody is claiming green chemistry, better natural ingredients. And so it's very hard to differentiate your solution just based on a sustainability-based storyline. Yeah. And so what was really critical is to really spend the time to develop the claims, go in the lab, build our own muscle in terms of application, formulation, know-how, and really demonstrate that we bring a different performance. You don't need to sacrifice that. Yeah. So that was a very important part that we really learned over the journey. In terms of the capacity and what you needed to demonstrate, in terms of volume, it depends on the type of customers. We got early adopters, small brands, but now to really move the needle and accelerate and get kind of your, big like Unilever's, L'Oreal's, Henkel's to move in a big way, they need to understand or they need to see your scale-up path, that you can quickly have not just one supply point, but you can quickly now take manufacturing outside the US into other areas because they are global and they are everywhere. They want to understand, again, availability on raw materials, And then, the unit economics are very key, right? And so it's really the hard part to do. But if you build that from the beginning, the way you design your chemistry and your processes, you can get there pretty quickly and do it in a very differentiated way.
Thanks. And I know ag.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
One of the things that you just mentioned just now that I've always seen as a huge challenge for all of us is how do you overcome the greenwashing?
Yeah.
I think you just need to be very science-based, be very fact-driven. It's hard as a startup because in our case, we go against very big corporations. They have their own LCA teams. They have an army of people internally driving their agenda on with the large brands as well. They are all kind of on it together, driving their agenda on within sustainability. Here are the one or two things that really are great for my chemistry, and I'm going to push that. So as a startup, it's very hard. You don't have the resources to pay for LCAs and additional metrics. And so I think battling them on that front is almost an uphill battle. And that's why we kind of reshifted a little bit the positioning. We have that, but we really say, okay, here is like what's very unique. The performance, it's better than the incumbents, it's better than the other alternatives where you're giving me a lower carbon footprint. And on top of that, here is how we manufacture. We don't have the same, to be very frank, the same open, the same level of metrics that they have. But I think you just need to be real, be upfront where you are in the journey, where you're going, and report regularly progress. It's not easy. It's a journey, and I don't think we're fully there, but that's the way we're tackling it.
Yeah, and so Andreas, the world of agriculture, obviously very different, right, in terms of their adoption cycles and timelines and what they're looking for. You want to speak a little bit to that?
Yes, absolutely. So, based on our 2-year understanding of this industry, farmers are small business owners, and they get 30 attempts to run a profitable business, so 30 growth seasons in their life. So it's a very quantitative business, actually. And so they're evaluating every single product and even running tests on products on their own farms, if it's a larger farm. And so what they want to see is a positive return on investment that doesn't have to be necessarily like 3-to-1 or 2-to-1. It has to be positive. The input cost is not too high, and it has to be predictable. That means you have to show it over 3 growth seasons and multiple locations. Yeah. And so that is our focus, getting the cost structure of making it right, and then getting the piloting right in different locations with different partners, different states, piloting also here in Connecticut this summer to verify that.
Thanks. Michelle, you mind talking about
concrete? Yeah. So I'm operating in a very conservative industry here. And so operational continuity has been paramount for us to be able to grow commercial partnerships and to be successful in this industry. And the number of times I've gotten the phone call that was, oops, we accidentally put cement in your silo. It's been numerous, and that actually takes us back, several weeks sometimes, to be able to work through the material. And so something that we have definitely learned is that, early on, as we are really getting our feet on the ground, having operational control is actually extremely important to us. And then certainly when you do something different than just addressing the material side and the supply chain of the concrete plant, but then also intervening on the curing side of it, if you can't create a process that can integrate very seamlessly with the existing built infrastructure and have a very simple process, to be able to train the existing plant team on how to use this technology, it's a huge uphill battle. And so that was significant learning, on the part of the Carbon Built team over the last couple of years. One of the reasons why we are vertically integrated to have more control over our plant operations. And, we also learned that there are times when you do have to make decisions on trade-offs, right? So if we want to bring our technology to market and start making revenue faster, there are elements of our technology that we have to incorporate as a phase 2. And we should focus on the elements that can achieve the majority of the benefit that we're looking for with much less operational friction, and then continue to develop, the full Cadillac of the technology that will drive deeper levels of decarbonization over time as we can develop an economic pathway for that.
Thanks. So maybe we should talk about sort of I don't know what you want to call it, the sleeping gorilla here, right? Which is the energy, the secondary, the primary energy that goes into making products, even if they are green products. They're still using relatively dirty energy today, right? So that's why I'm glad staff could be here to sort of talk about the nuclear industry. It's coming back, and with it, there's obviously going to be more spent fuel, and there's obviously ways to manage that spent fuel. So, if you don't mind, give us a little peek.
Absolutely. So the things there are two things we get from fossil fuels today. There's energy and carbon. Energy is really the most valuable thing that we get from fossil fuels, and we get that in the form of heat or electricity. We need to replace the fossil fuels with lower carbon fuels in order to decarbonize and address this climate change problem. And you can do that in a way, on top of that, you can utilize that electricity and that heat in ways that help other processes as well. Electrification of the chemical industry is a huge is a huge cornerstone of decarbonization, because, as I mentioned, in the chemical industry, we get all of our energy and all of our carbon from, well, not all, but substantially all of our energy and all of our carbon from fossil fuels today. So the core of what I'm doing, what many others are doing, is to replace fossil fuels. The core of what, and it's telling that a lot of the anti-nuclear groups out there are actually funded by like Chevron, Shell, ExxonMobil, and BP. So if you want to see who's actually a real threat, just look where the money's going. The interesting thing about nuclear is that is that we already have a lot of it. These lights there's probably a good number of nuclear electrons that are powering these lights right now today. The biggest nuclear power plant in the Northeast is here in Connecticut. And you can take that electricity and use that to manufacture green chemicals. But you can also take the heat that comes out of small nuclear plants. So if you've heard of things like small modular reactors or micro reactors, they output 9-to-1 heat to electricity of the energy that's coming out of a micro reactor. And part of that is just because at small scales your heat integration is not that great. And even on larger scales, you have a lot of excess heat that you can use to power chemistry. Rather than burn natural gas or burn coal and fire a boiler, you could use nuclear heat. And there's actually an ARPA-E program that's being built in the Department of Energy toward using nuclear heat to power chemistry, to power chemical reactions. The biggest waste stream, or the only waste stream from nuclear, is the spent fuel. And in places like France, it's decently well managed, but not economically managed. So France takes their spent fuel, refines it into fresh fuel, and feeds their nuclear reactors in pretty much a closed loop fuel cycle. Here in the U.S., all of the spent fuel is sitting in casks right next to reactors, and that's a weak point that we have in America in our nuclear industry, and it's also a huge environmental concern. So that's actually what my stealth mode company is addressing, is the waste coming out of the nuclear plants. Now, think about the waste coming out of a nuclear plant over the course of its entire lifetime, which is smaller than this room, compared to the volume of waste that comes out of a coal-fired power plant over the course of its lifetime, which is incredibly colossal. You're talking about CO2, soot, NOx, SOx, and there's actually a good amount of radiation that comes out of coal-fired power plants. So one of the early goals is, if we can get rid of coal and we can replace that base load with nuclear, that could help to not only green the electrical grid, but also help to green the chemical industry.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Are there other sort of elements of upcycling nuclear fuel that could be used as, say, precursors for other chemical, industries or things of that nature? I mean, are there other uses?
Well, today we get a lot of our precious metals from overseas, specifically from China. and that's a problem. We want to be able to produce our own rare earths and precious metals. You can get the entire U.S. consumption of certain precious metals from the spent fuel we have sitting next to nuclear power plants today. So you kill two birds with one stone. It's not even just getting rid of the waste. It's also turning that waste into something that's a very valuable resource. And on top of that, if you look at all the other products that you could make using green chemical production methods, if you look at the life cycle analysis of these, if you can replace the electricity that's used in these processes or the consumables in these processes that are generating energy in one way or another, you could decrease the carbon footprint of chemistry across the board.
Yeah. I found that to be super interesting when I was reading about what they're doing in France and stuff like that. It's a resource that nobody taps.
And everybody's buying power from France right now.
Right.
So, given where they get the rest of their natural resources from, it's a geopolitical problem in addition to it's primarily a climate problem, and then it's a geopolitical problem on top of that. But as are many of the products that are being made here. Fertilizer is super important. It's a cornerstone. Everybody here likes to eat, I imagine. And in order for us all to eat, we need fertilizer. We all got here on a road.
Right.
So, we've all used concrete in the very, very recent past. Yeah. And we're going to need more of it in the future. So all of the products that we're making, and then, starting out with beauty products, you can scale to all sorts of things with the technology you guys are using. So it's really really incredible and impressive the ways that we can decarbonize not just the industries we're in today, but the ones that we're going to be in the future.
Yeah, thanks. So I promised I would leave plenty of time for you folks to ask some questions. So why don't we do that? Does anybody want to go first? Shoot first.
If you can't do perfect on all of the following: cost, performance, and sustainability, and you have to sacrifice, or at least partially sacrifice, at least one of them, what is the first one you think is sacrificable, and what is the least one? What's the last one you think you wouldn't want to sacrifice unless you have to?
In concrete, sustainability would be the first thing you sacrifice, and performance the last, for sure.
I argue that's a trick question because sustainability is long-term cost and performance. So you're saying, what you're really asking is, should you sacrifice your long-term well-being for short-term gains? And so I don't think so. So I actually think sustainability is the thing that you can least get rid of in a process. And then, of course, if you're thinking between cost and performance as a binary, unfortunately, and I think this is a more of a comment on the state of the world. A lot of people will sacrifice performance first before they sacrifice cost, and there's a lot of examples of that. So I think sustainability is the most important. Cost is the second most important, and then performance is the third most important.
Yeah, I think it's, like you're saying, it's a tricky balance, and I think it highly depends on the application and the industry. I do think, though, there are many areas where if you really have that performance edge, I like to think about more the cost in use, and really, if you have the performance and you have the right sustainability behind it, and you can really bring that message across the right way, I think there is more room than what we think in some of the areas to really sacrifice on the cost. And, we need to make that effort, position the right way, and educate on those long-term impacts on, deprioritizing sustainability. It might take longer to develop, that commercial momentum, but I think it's extremely important to do that and not, deprioritize sustainability kind of as the first thing, because I think that would be the wrong long way approach to do this.
In the fertilizer context, I would say probably your product market fit is wrong in that case. Like, fertilizers actually has many different sub-industries. So you have different soil types, different climates, different crops, different agricultural practices. And for example, as a sustainability aspect of those three, farmers are actually good stewards of their land, right? Like when they own the land, it's like the biggest asset they have. And so if you're degrading your land, you're degrading your asset. Even if you're renting the land, those rental contracts are long-term. So you're degrading your long-term productivity. And so for all these different practices and integrations, probably I would then look at a different crop or a different type of application.
You definitely have the hardest job. Yeah, your customer set is like the most varied. It's like your development timelines, all those kind of things. You just have to get it right for almost every one. It's like a different recipe for each thing.
Very reasonable customers, though, actually. So.
Yeah. Yes, Paul.
So this question is for KD.
Okay.
And it's because I know you're one of the most thoughtful people when it comes to the ecosystem of investing and economic models. All of these folks are shockingly and outrageously innovative. Mm-hmm. This whole conference is on innovation. Started with biotech, added different tracks. Added a climate track, we just added a water track, we have an art track. We don't have an economic business or investment track. Yet I would argue that innovation and those models, those approaches, those frameworks are what are most necessary in order to make these types of innovations thrive. And it is perhaps where we have the least innovation, in my humble opinion. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree, Paul. No, I mean, look, that's at the crux of it, right? Is really trying to figure out how to accelerate and bring these innovations to market faster with sort of a more thoughtful and better sort of supported system to do that. I don't know if capital markets are supposed to be very efficient, right? But they're pretty inefficient too. And a lot of that has to do with greed and corporate sort of, I'll call it, influence to the bottom line and not necessarily towards the hidden costs that we're all facing and feeling and being convinced that we're not feeling. Yeah, but anyway, that's a great question. So, Anastasia.
Hi, I was curious just to build on that a little bit. If you're seeing any innovation from customers on doing sort of forward offtake agreements or interesting structures that give you the certainty that there's a buyer on the other side if you should build it. And if I've seen some announcements recently from like Microsoft and with a competitor probably to with Carbon Bill, but where they're separating the environmental claim of the concrete, the greener concrete, from their data center, and there's a sort of a book and claim system with that. Do you see a lot of potential in those sorts of structures? Are they useful? Are they problematic? Might be mainly a question for Carbon Bill, but if any of you have experience with those sort of, maybe your previous company, with those forward offtakes, and if that's a source of interesting capital we can leverage better.
So I would say that it's definitely a source of interesting capital, and we have also structured similar agreements to what was announced with Microsoft, where a portion of that capital is actually paid up front to help us with that early development, and then we have deliveries of the CO2 reductions over time. That is the only form within concrete of contracted, forward-looking cash flows that we have been able to find. Unfortunately, in the construction industry, people buy concrete when you've got a construction project. It's very, very difficult to get that contracted out into long tenors, or any tenors really at all for that matter. And so the carbon attributes absolutely is extremely helpful. So we do have a similar contract, and we are looking to be able to expand those partnerships as well. We're a part of this emerging book and claim system where we are decoupling the attribute, from the actual concrete product, because it is very difficult to be able to deliver that concrete to the person who's actually willing to pay the attribute. And so we're very hopeful in the future of that marketplace. But I will say, it's hard to convince investors that that's a locked-in thing when this marketplace is really just emerging. And so what we have is we've got $5 million of such contracts done. The questions that I always get are, can you really project that you're going to keep doing this? Who else is going to do this for you? And so there's certainly a benefit, but it doesn't solve our problem here. But the faster that we can all move in that direction, it will be helpful.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think book and claim systems are ultimately a force for good. Like if you just think about it from like a purely greenhouse gas perspective, you don't have to transport your thing to where it's being consumed. You can book and claim it, and so that means you have less emissions, essentially getting your product to its customer. So ultimately, I think, and on top of that, the creative ways of financing around book and claim systems, I think, are great to enable capital projects, greener capital projects to be built. That being said, with any mechanism or force for good, you will at some points have bad actors that come in and try to game the system or take advantage of it. And so that's just the thing that I think if you're implementing a book and claim system, you have to watch out for. If you're a regulator, and in Canada this was huge, if you're a regulator, you have to be very cautious on how things are accounted for. So I think ultimately book and claim is great, but there are just a lot of loopholes that you have to watch out for.
And I'll maybe also just mention that we have also sought other forms of catalytic capital, through family offices who want to support our proven technology and serve as, a bridge to bankability so that we're not only reliant on dilutive equity capital to be able to scale our solution now that we're at the point in time where we have proven that this works, right? And now we just need to figure out how to scale up. So when we bought our concrete plant in Connecticut, we had significant support from the Schmidt Family Foundation, who provided us with a recoverable grant instrument. And that is essentially a no-interest loan that we will end up paying back when we reach certain carbon impact milestones. And so, in a sense, that gives the capital a way to be recycled back into the ecosystem, but us a way to really get our feet on the ground and have access to some non-dilutive dollars as well as we're approving our first plant under our ownership.
Anything to add?
Hard tech requires 7 to 10 years, maybe 5 to 10 years to do technical de-risking and building the businesses. Political timelines, in contrast, are 2, 4, 6 years in the United States. How do you make your product market fit and your growth be less policy dependent? And do you have any advice on that?
I can take this question. Also, to Michelle's point about catalytic capital and how you keep going in that sense, I think in agriculture you have maybe a 25% satisfying answer on that, which is a way of getting your field trials at least capitalized. And that is through something called checkoff organizations. These are farmer associations organized at every state level. And as a farmer, when you go to your grain elevator and sell your grain, a certain percentage goes into that organization, and they are fostering R&D on behalf of all the farmers so that the innovation flows back into the farming operation. And it's actually a very democratic process. So those are farmers on these boards, and they are thinking long-term about their farming operations in their state. So that is, I think, a relatively insensitive way, at least, in the agricultural industry.
My answer to this question is, 1, be respectful to people at all times, even if they politically disagree with you. 2, stick with your guns. I just said that despite what you might read in the news, there is climate change is still happening. And I think that it's very important that people who have historically been, building projects and doing things to help to combat climate change continue to stick to their guns. And I do think that there's an element of, if you stick to your guns, other people will respect you as well. Despite political climates changing every 2 to 4 years, I think it's very important to continue on the path to build your projects. Because as you said, these are 10-year projects. So you're going to go through many cycles over the course of building one project. And if you set it up properly and you don't bet the bank on one particular tax credit that's contentious or something like that, you have a much higher chance of success. And that's also just standard business sense and risk mitigation and risk management.
What I would say is that we purposefully designed our go-to-market strategy and our commercialization approach around adapting our technology to the existing built infrastructure of our country. And what does that do? It reduces capital requirements and it reduces our reliance on government subsidies. And so, we are a recipient of a $6.5 million Department of Energy grant that continues to be on hold right now. We're very hopeful, and it's fully contracted. We hope that it comes through, but we are in a paused, state where we're not progressing to the next phase of that project development. And so we as a company, though, are going to be fine because we're already producing concrete at this facility. This was an expansion project for us, and we will be able to develop the business case and eventually raise debt capital to fill that grant hole, to the extent that it doesn't come through. But it was extremely important for us to be able to figure out how to lower capital costs and use the infrastructure that's already built today across the country.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to add one thing. And I think it's linked a little bit to the concept of focus, right? So I think it's understanding that, although you might have this big vision of where you're going to go and many areas where you want to deploy, I think from the beginning, leaning into areas where you think the adoption will be faster. They might not be sometimes the biggest opportunities long term, but they are going to give you some momentum early on because the sales cycles are totally different in construction versus in beauty versus in crop care, right? So for us, it was really important to identify the initial kind of go-to market or product market fit in an industry where we could demonstrate adoption pretty quickly. And then once we got that, use that as a almost launching platform to start expanding into kind of more industrial areas or, bigger industries where it's going to just take many, many more years to get your chemistry to work.
I'll just add, with the investor perspective, choose your investors carefully, right? You should choose investors that don't have that 4 to 6 horizon. They have a true deep tech, and I bring that deep tech. Drew brings that deep tech kind of experience and perspective to our climate tech fund. We are not just a 10-year horizon fund like most VCs. We're an evergreen fund. The engine in Boston is an 18-year fund. There's a reason for that, right? And also set your milestones and align your sort of expectations, your deliverables, to be realistic, right? Investors all know you're going to miss, but if they're realistic, you have a shot at kind of getting another round and then keep going and keep going. So I think alignment, choose your investors carefully, and plan for the long haul, like you said. So anyway. Yeah, go ahead.
This is specifically for staff, actually. Just a quick clarification question. Are you looking to capitalize on the byproducts of nuclear fuel or completely close the cycle? And also, have you been dealing with any significant regulatory headwinds from either domestic, like NNSA, DOE, or international IAEA?
So that's a great question, and it was answered last Friday in a lot of cases. So we all came to an agreement, and by we I mean all the folks in the nuclear industry. There are various different factions. Many are concerned with non-proliferation. So many of those factions said, "Thou shalt not reprocess ever in the United States." We managed to come to an agreement with that group for folks such as myself, who's focused on closing the fuel cycle in the U.S. and reprocessing spent nuclear fuel, that is. And we said that the government is going to own the reprocessing facility. And everything I'm saying is public. It's in these executive orders. The government is going to own the reprocessing facility, but private industry is going to provide the technology. It's going to operate the facility, and it's going to own all of the inputs and outputs. But the government owning the facility also makes the operators feel better because the liability then kind of sits with the government if there is a proliferation issue. And on top of that, the security now sits with the government. on the proliferation. So I think we all came to the table. I mean, obviously, for a lot of reprocessors or people working on reprocessing tech, we want to own everything. But we have to compromise, and that actually ties back into the prior question of, over the course of building a deep tech company, you're going to have to compromise with the other side on many different points, and that's what we did. That got signed in the executive orders last Friday.
Thanks, guys.
From a cost, performance, sustainability perspective, for those that are selling products, do you see any willingness to pay for sustainability or pay a green premium from the bulk of your potential customers, or just a few of them?
Yeah, I hear more and more people just walking away from the green premium concept at all. I don't think that's really resonating well with brands, maybe with some smaller ones, but we don't really position what we do that way and really lead on kind of the combination of sustainability with additional performance, so that performance that we can bring through natural ingredients and the right way, and not really talk about a green premium. Because I think in that respect, you're basically saying, I'm a replacement, and then you're just gonna, add the premium because of the sustainability. Mm-hmm.
In concrete, only the hyperscalers will pay. So that's the book and claim system here. But we've got to be able to deliver a product that meets performance standards and is sold at price parity in order to be successful in our commodity market.
Is that different in food? I mean, organics has been able to maintain a premium, right?
Yeah, I think from a carbon perspective, it's hard to justify a green premium. I'll qualify that in a second. But for the final customers, so the growers, I think there is the sustainability perspective of your soil health and your soil productivity. So it ties really into their own cost structure of their operation, like whether they're willing to incorporate that. So I wouldn't call it a green premium, just as part of the normal cost structure. For row crop, where about 40% of corn and soy goes into biofuels, and like with the renewable fuel standard long time ago, is one of the things I would say works very well and maybe cuts the conservatively estimated CO2 emissions by 40% compared to fossil fuels. So there is kind of a mandated green premium, but it's not a premium, it's more like a mandate for having a certain volume in the market.
Right. It's a government piece, yeah.
Yeah, I have two questions for anyone that really wants to take it. How do scale and impact define a climate tech company? Must a venture achieve a certain geographic or market scale before it could use that label? Or can a strictly local or regional operation focused on environmental remediation or green chemistry rightfully claim it as well? For each of your ventures, at what point of scale or impact would you feel comfortable saying you are having a climate level impact? It's a matter of scale.
I think that you can be kind of broad with that. I would say that we are now selling concrete from multiple facilities. All of our markets are actually pretty local, but we have demonstrated that our technology works in multiple manufacturing facilities in different production environments. And to me, that indicates that we have a solution that has the ability to scale in the much broader sense.
Yeah, I was going to say we like to think about the impact in a broad way, not just kind of where we manufacture and where the product goes, but even from the very beginning, where we source from, right? So I think a lot of the impact, even what we do today, we only have one manufacturing site here in Connecticut. But the way we source ingredients, I think, really enables us to be very impactful from day one. Everything is sourced locally here. The crops or the forest-based ingredients come from the U.S. We manufacture it here, and for now we distribute globally here. But the vision really to go to that rapid impact is that we will copy-paste this kind of very resilient local manufacturing concept into another region. And when we do it, we'll source locally there, we'll manufacture locally there, and we serve the customers locally there. And so we are in the cusp of really doing that. In the next couple of years, we'll look at taking manufacturing outside the US, and we're going to do that again with the same formula. Basically, doing everything locally, reducing the impact from the extraction or the sourcing of the natural raw materials to how we manufacture to where the product goes.
And I'll just add that if you look at the trend in global greenhouse gas emissions, it's still going up. So it's going in the wrong direction. So I would argue that, there's still so much work to do to scale that you need to adopt a broad definition. Really, I would almost take a step back and just look at technologies and look at businesses and think, really, it's just, are they having an impact? Are they having a positive impact toward the climate, or are they just greenwashing? Is this like ExxonMobil's, algae commercials and stuff like that? Or is it like actually something that's, sorry for if anybody here in this room worked on ExxonMobil's algae commercials. But like, is it something that's, kind of like a marketing campaign, or is it actually having a material impact toward the climate, no matter how small?
And are you applying pressure on the broader market to be able to prioritize a sustainable solution?
Last question. Go ahead, Joseph.
I have a question. We have a lot of chemists on stage and also in the audience, I think, when I look around. The only chemistry words I heard were terpene and uranium, I think, if I paid attention correctly.
I said precursors, come on.
Okay. So I'd be interested in kind of like the thoughts of the scientists and non-scientists on like how you translate and like how you find that role in like your new job titles. Yeah.
Maybe because I'm the most recently out of research world. So my co-founder and me, I think we have to constantly stop us of trying to do too much research. We love to do that, but yeah, for fertilizer, it's such a low-tech industry. So sometimes when we look at what we're doing in lab, it looks very, very low-tech. We have to force ourselves to do that in this way, because otherwise we would be developing something we can't scale later on. So I think that's the biggest shift from my view.
I would say for me, it's been a journey, right? So I'm a polymer chemist by background. Definitely started my career in the chemical space, in innovation technology roles. And then from there, where I found was very hard to sometimes translate the solution you had to the customer, whatever the customer was, right? And so, if you're in a big company, the functions tend to get even more siloed. So it was a struggle, even if I thought, I had big roles at BSF on innovation, and I'm like, this is a great product, it's just gonna go. Like, it was just not really gelling with the customer the way we're bringing across the value proposition. We're sometimes also not fully understanding the actual challenges that the customers had. And so if you had only commercially focused teams interacting with the customers, like, they were also not picking up on those opportunities. So I really loved when I transitioned from a purely innovation technology role to be more customer facing and be more in a commercial kind of business development role, because I thought I can really bridge things. I was seeing many more opportunities where I'm like, okay, here's a solution or a challenge they have. I'm like, okay, we work on this solution in totally different industry. I think that's gonna work. And I think having more, science-based people in front of customers can really help us bridge, find better opportunities quicker, but also explain, how science can really help solve these big challenges in a clear way. So, yeah.
I would love to go into details of the electrochemical potential of uranium complexes in various molten salts. I would love to. But that being said, I think you've heard me say that my prior two companies, I used to say my job is to teach general chemistry to customers and investors. So I was essentially, teaching general chemistry customers and investors. And now in nuclear, where it's more political, it's more political, and a lot of customers, are involved with that. And now I just say I teach rocks for jocks. Uranium, uranium to this administration, and that's really kind of like the way that I spend my day to day is trying to take these complex. These complex processes, these complex things, proliferation itself is a very complex, is 50 grams of plutonium a huge issue? Spoiler alert, it is. Is 50 grams of plutonium a huge issue to people? What are these minimum detection limits you need to worry about? But all of that is being communicated to policymakers who have no idea, what the difference is, between plutonium and uranium even. So I would say that I like talking about the high level concepts, but my job really is to take that and simplify it for people.
We can edit the video to kind of take some of that commentary out, just help.
Yeah, we can take out the rocks for jocks. That's fair.
And I'm a former investment banker, so I'm the least technical and accomplished out of all of my fellow panelists here. But I was put into this position to actually break Carbon Built out of this technology development cycle. And we're a company that is just now starting to generate revenue. And we're on track this year to be hitting close to 5 million, and we're looking at projects that will achieve 50 million in revenue next year. And so it's an extraordinarily important part in our company life cycle to figure out how do we actually now bring this to market and bring this to market in a compelling way.
So I want to ask Lars or Hanmo to come up, and while they do, I want to thank our panelists, Andreas, Oyana, staff, and Michelle. You guys are great. Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. So with that, all yours.
Thank you. If I can just steal 2 minutes for a little announcement. So we have seen a lot of passion around green chemistry, a lot of experience, and this is not a pitch, this is more like an invitation to share all your knowledge and to share your passion about green chemistry, green engineering, business, entrepreneurship, to give it to other parts of the world. So I'm a program director for the Global Green Chem Innovation and Network Program at the Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering at Yale. And we're working in this UNIDO and World Bank GEF-backed program where we're trying to help countries all around the world, specifically Indonesia, Jordan, Peru, Serbia, Uganda, and Ukraine, to build out green chemistry capacities. And one component of this project that's particularly interesting, I guess, for everybody in the audience is an accelerator program, which we are currently running in all those 6 countries in parallel. And that is a program specifically focused on companies and ventures and startups that are using green chemistry in their DNA. So this is really an invitation to reach out over all the different oceans that separate us from the countries that I just mentioned, and be a mentor or check out for maybe interesting investment opportunities or propose real-world challenges in upcoming innovation challenges to really see where the talent is, and also general guidance, expert guidance, and even pilot support. So I would invite you all, if you're interested in this program, to scan that QR code, or that one, all the same. And if you see somebody from the Center for Green Chemistry, Green Engineering at Yale, you can also reach out to us. You can see me if I walk around, just if you're interested in the program. So I would really encourage you to be a part of this amazing opportunity that is bringing green chemistry out of our own living room into the world. Thank you.